Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We try it one more time, just a call and response kind of thing. Good morning. Great.
Excellent. We're thrilled to have everybody here in Cinema 2 so early in the morning, so it's wonderful to see you. Just by a quick show of hands, how many people in the audience have been to a conference before? Okay, that's a pretty great number. So you know what to expect: more coffee, more muffins, more events like this. If you have not been to a conference before, then I'm sure this will be one of very many that you attend. So conferences can sometimes feel awkward and formal, but we want to emphasize that there is a distinct purpose and reason for you all being here today for the whole day. So number one, it creates a dynamic and concentrated space of ideas, inspiration, and insight. It provides an opportunity to hear from and meet new people, both on the stage and the people who are sitting in the audience with you. And most importantly, what you hear today can spark new directions in your creative work and ways of being in the world and the ways of being with other creators and collaborators. So we ask that each one of you here today simply approach the conference with openness and willingness to accept new offerings and new ideas as they come to you. Please take this opportunity to ask questions about the things you're unsure about, the topics that interest you most, and to ask questions you haven't yet had answered.
We want to start by sharing just 4 reasons why we're most excited for today, and hopefully you'll be interested in them as well. The first is that you're going to get to see 5 films today. There are 4 short films as part of our first session, which we'll get to in just a moment, from a group of dynamic filmmakers, and then a feature film to close out the day that has played at some festivals but hasn't yet been released here in Canada. 2, we have an incredible group of speakers over the 4 sessions today, and I wanted to let you know collectively about some of the projects they've worked on. The Shape of Water, Molly's Game, Unarmed Verses, Closet Monster, Into the Forest, Giant Little Ones, Citizen Gangster, The Book of Negroes, The Grizzlies, Mouthpiece, Silas, Mariner, The Embargo Project, Total Recall, Wild Archaeology, and Never Steady, Never Still. Such an accomplished group of speakers we'll have here today, so we really hope that you'll take from their energy and from their contributions. Third thing is that there is coffee, there is snacks, there is lunch, and the fourth and most importantly is that you are all here. We're excited to have your perspectives and your point of views in the room. You are our future creators, our future visionaries, our future storytellers. Some of you may work together and create new things, so we're honored to have you here in one space. So knowing that, we'd like to start the day by injecting a little bit of energy and openness into the room. We'd like to ask you to stand if you're able to do so. Yes, thank you. We anticipate you might be standing beside people you came with, so what we'd like you to do is greet someone in a row behind or in front of you and provide 3 things: your name, where you're coming from, and the best film you've seen this year. "20 more seconds to tell your life story to the person in front of you." Nice. I didn't think they'd do that.
Oh, that sounds good.
Okay, thank you. You now know another person you can say hello to over lunch or at a break. Thank you for being such willing participants. I thought that everyone would stay in their seats, so that's wonderful. So let's get things started with our first session this morning. It's our pleasure to introduce you to the host of this first session, our colleague Danis Goulet. Danis co-programs TIFF's Canadian features. Prior to this, Danis was co-programmer of TIFF Shortcuts. She is also the former artistic director of the Imaginative Film and Media Arts Festival and has curated award-winning short film commissioning projects, including Embargo Collective 1 and 2. Danis has developed initiatives for the Ontario Arts Council and has served on the boards for the Toronto Arts Council and the Images Festival. As a director, her films have screened at numerous festivals in Canada and around the world, including the Toronto International Film Festival, the Berlinale, Imaginative, and the Sundance Film Festival. She is an alumna of TIFF Talent Lab and the National Screen Institute. Danis, who is Cree Métis, was born in La Ronge, Saskatchewan, and currently lives here in Toronto. We're incredibly honored to have Danis lead the conversation this morning, so please join me in welcoming Danis Goulet.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Keith and Jessica. I am here really just to introduce the shorts that we're about to see, and then after the shorts, we'll bring the filmmakers up and start the discussion. So I am very pleased to have everybody here with us, and it's my pleasure to introduce these shorts. So we'll be watching 4 short films. Louise de Felipe's For Nonna Anna, Lisa Jackson's Savage, Anjali Nayar's Escape, and Tyrone Tommy's To Live and Die in Rexdale. So without further ado, let's watch them and then we'll talk after. Thanks. Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Lisa Jackson, Louise de Felipez, Tyrone Tommy, and Anjali Nayar. So Lisa Jackson is an award-winning Anishinaabe filmmaker working in both fiction and documentary. Her credits include Indictment, The Crimes of Shelley Chartier, which won Best Doc at Imaginative in 2017, and the VR piece Bedobin First Light, which premiered at Tribeca. She's also an advisor for the National Screen Institute's Indigidocs and sits on an advisory committee for the National Film Board's Indigenous Action Plan. She's currently working on a multimedia installation, an IMAX film, and other TV and film projects. And her film was Savage, which also won a Canadian Screen Award, the one we watched first. Hi, Lisa. Louise de Felipez is a Toronto-based trans femme filmmaker whose work celebrates otherness and employs a fierce female gaze. Their work has played internationally at festivals such as TIFF, Rotterdam, and BFI Flair. Their most recent work, which we watched, For Nonna Anna, what played at TIFF and also won a special jury prize at Sundance. Welcome, Louise. And Tyrone Tommy is an award-winning Toronto-based filmmaker. His films have been celebrated internationally at more than 30 festivals. His most recent short, Mariner, premiered at TIFF and was also at TIFF Top 10 shorts. He's also been supported with grants from NBC Universal, Kodak Motion Picture, Ontario Arts Council, and was the winner of the Lindy Lee Tracy Award. He is currently developing a feature version of Mariner as well as a feature To Live and Die in Rexdale, which was the same name of the short that we saw. Hi, Tyrone. And Anjali Nayar is an award-winning storyteller and technologist based between Nairobi and Montreal. We just watched her latest short, Escape, and she also made a documentary, Silas, that premiered at TIFF and has played almost 100 film festivals and won numerous awards around the world. Her feature directorial debut, Gunrunners, premiered at Hot Docs and is now available on Netflix, nominated for both a Canadian Screen Awards, a DGC Canada Award for Best Documentary. She is currently directing Just a Band, a fractionally fictional documentary about an Afro-electric pop group that wants to go to space. And she's writing her first feature-length scripted film on the intersection of data and politics. Welcome. So the first question I'd like to throw out to all of you is, after just watching the shorts that we've seen, why did you choose to tell this particular story?
Okay, I'll start. So I guess I told For Nonna Anna because I was sick of seeing the trans experience told through the cis male lens. A lot of times when we see stories about trans people, their transition is at the heart of the story, and trans people, we have life after transition. Our life is not consumed by gender. And I really just wanted to tell a story about 2 women who are going through similar experiences, and they're validating each other's identities.
Beautiful.
With To Live and Die in Rexdale, the feature version of it is based on my time in high school. I played at Don Bosco, which was under the coach of our former mayor, Rob Ford. So that relationship and that we had over the course of 4 years, over the course of high school, is the basis for the film. And I was at the Canadian Film Centre, which is kind of like film school, but very condensed over the course of 6 months. And at the end, they ask you to make a teaser about your film, and they give you like $2,000 in like 4 minutes. And that's sort of the rule, because they do these kind of like reality game things. And you know, you kind of take the story and you're trying to think of what to distill down and do in 4 minutes. And so I decided to take the three main characters and kind of distill it down to the tension that they have with themselves throughout the film, and that sort of toxic masculinity that they live in, and sort of just portray that on screen and do something really fast and really bold, which is very different from the films that I normally do, which are very long and more brooding and slow. And so this was a great challenge to sort of take a story and distill it down and show that aspect of my life.
For the film Escape, essentially it was Mech that came to me with the story. They had seen a previous film of mine, and I don't often do branded work, but Mech's approach to this was really interesting because they came to it from the perspective that the outdoor space, so the outdoors and mountain climbing and, you know, mountain biking and everything else that happens that kind of makes up Mech's portfolio is really dominated by white men. And what we see on the screen, what we experience in the stores, everything about that is like a very particular part of Canada. And instead of putting money into advertising and so on, they thought, okay, why don't we use this budget to make some films and promote the people and the ideals that we don't often see on screen. So it kind of thinks about the next generation of Canadians. So it's with that lens that we really went to this film, and it was really nice because it was like the outdoor film. It wasn't about achieving a particular aim. It was really about looking within, which is something that I think you only really see when you speak from like an immigrant family to an immigrant family. Like we saw different things in one another apart from the actual journey, and that's what was really nice about making that film.
Well, mine was a bit unusual because it was made as part of the Embargo, the first Embargo collective, which was headed by Danis and dreamed up by Danis and was super fun and challenging. And so what the Embargo collective was a group of international Indigenous filmmakers, 7 of us. And the idea was to try to push us a bit out of our comfort zone to provoke creativity. And so we came together as a group and we talked about our work, and 2 or 3 days of these meetings culminated in the collective group sort of assigning challenges to each of us for the making of a short film, which we had a year to make. And so at the time I made this film, I had only done documentary, and my obstructions or challenges were to make a musical, to have heavy set decoration, to have at least 1 non-actor and 1 professional actor, and no English allowed, yeah. So, which was a universal. None of us used English, except for the person who broke the rules, and which was Taika Waititi. So it worked out. But so yeah, and then the subject matter of this film, beyond those things, my mother went to residential school. It's about residential school, for those of you who don't know, and I won't do the history lesson because I'm hopeful everyone has heard of it. But my mother attended residential school from age 5 to 15. It was very defining in her life in a not good way. And, you know, so I think a lot about not just the experience of the kids, which is in the film, but also, you know, I kind of wanted to explore the experience of, you know, if there's generations of parents who their children are taken away, what does that do to them? And so that's partly what is in here, but also the idea that as an Indigenous filmmaker, I think, you know, whenever you're dealing with difficult circumstances or trauma, the idea that you're not reduced to your trauma, so hence the dancing, which can be interpreted in various ways, and they're all correct, but is about kind of the human spirit, right? And the resiliency, and that regardless of our circumstances, we survive, and we are intact, and there's joy, et cetera, et cetera. And also hip hop is huge in Indigenous communities, so it's kind of a link from past to, Michael Jackson's Thriller to the present day.
Great. And Lisa, you talked about the challenges that you were put under to make the film. Those were imposed, but can anybody else speak to, maybe the biggest challenge of making your shorts? What you had to go up against the worst?
Mine was just that I was told by Mech on the same week that I think Jean was reaching the Arctic. So within about 5 days, we created a crew and flew all the way up to the Arctic and shot that in probably 22 hours, like all the Arctic material. So I think for all intents and purposes, for me, it was just like time and place. And documentary is so much about that. It's being there, it's being present, it's, dealing with minus 30 degrees Celsius and 30 km/h winds and making something, whatever you can make.
And had you met Jean in advance?
I had spoken with him on the phone. He's like a really difficult person. He would laugh at that when I tell him. Yeah, I think it took us 22 hours to film the stuff in the Arctic, but it took me about probably 4 days to nail down a narrative. Like, we did a lot of interviews together, and a lot of what Jean goes through and you see is like challenging himself to be okay with who he is and being different than his parents expect him to be. And so that's like a challenge throughout his life. And so he challenges everybody around him in the same way to portray him correctly.
As you're talking to him under a very intense time constraint, how are you working, and how do you know when you're like, okay, I've got the story, we've got it, we're good?
Well, we had what we had in terms of the film. He fell like 5 times, and I was working with a DP that I had also met that day for the first time. And that was the only of the 5 times that we had on film, because somehow we were like saving film, which doesn't exist anymore. But like, we had so many challenges. But that's what's kind of nice about film, is like, despite the challenges, I think that makes you be creative. So in the same way that those were the restrictions that were on your piece, like those restrictions, when you come back and you don't have sound, sometimes that's like the best thing that could happen to you, because it makes you do something different. It makes you do something unexpected. That's where the creativity really comes from.
Great, so embrace it. Tyrone?
The challenges. It was challenging a lot. I love the Canadian Film Centre. It's not a knock on them, but they're also a nonprofit, so they're very adverse to things going badly, and they don't have a lot of funding to do things. So we had very little money and very little time. You only had 1 day. You only had $2,000. We couldn't show Rob Ford. It couldn't look like Rob Ford. You couldn't say it was Rob Ford. Couldn't be anything like Rob Ford. Couldn't use my high school, so I had to like kind of just reimagine the entire plot, the entire basis of the script, and distill something down that was simpler, but also removed from it so that we wouldn't get sued or they wouldn't get sued or something. And it was just it was very challenging a lot of times, because there's not a lot of money or a lot of resources. Sometimes the pieces can be very contained or very small. Sometimes they're just shot at the school itself. But it was just a lot of phone calls, calling some rep leagues around the city. The Oshawa Hawkeyes are the players that are on this. They're not actors. They're just a football team that we just kind of brought in, and you pick out which guys sort of have that quality that you're looking for, and then just work with them to get a performance. And well, except for the coach. The coach is a friend of mine, and an actor, Rod Wilson, and just locking down the different aspects of it. It was challenging in a way that felt kind of felt like a race almost, that you were trying to similar to trying to like cross. Definitely not the same as crossing a country, but it felt like, it felt like a race of some sort. It's like, all right, go. You have 2 weeks. Go do this, and which is not the way I normally work. So it was interesting, but yeah.
I mean, every film is just a challenge in and of itself. But if I had to break it down to like 2 challenges, for this film, this was the first film that I had written and directed on my own. Before that, I had always written and directed with a partner. So it was just a lot of me dealing with like my inner demons and that little voice that's like, you're not enough. You don't know what you're doing. And I kind of just always had to put that to the side and be like, no, I know what I'm doing. I know what my vision is, and I'm going to go for it. And the second one, I guess, comes hand in hand with that, but knowing when to say no. I found really early on when I was showing this script to people, a lot of producers or people who I was looking at that I really want to work with, they would have questions like, how do we know she's trans? And as soon as I started getting those questions, I was like, oh, are they not getting the story? Am I doing something wrong? And then I realized, no, this is the story you want to tell, and this is the way you want to tell it. So you need to work with people that have the same vision as you. So as soon as someone asked that question, I just would be like, it's not going to work out. And the people that I chose to work with, those are the people who didn't ask that question. It wasn't even on the radar for them. It was just like, this is a story about a girl who happens to be trans. We don't need to know that she is trans. If you get that, that's great. If you don't, that's okay too.
It's really amazing what you're talking about, because I think the collaborators that you choose will be so important. And I think especially when you're developing your voice as a filmmaker, it is so easy to just get bowled over and swept in other directions and get thrown into sort of the throes of self-doubt. So I think it's really important what you're talking about. And I want to also touch on an earlier point that you made, which is that you were really tired of seeing, trans experience through a certain lens. Do you think it does matter who's telling the story? Do you think gaze matters?
I do. I don't think this story would exist if I didn't tell it. I think it would be another story about a girl who's not accepted by her religious Italian family. And I didn't want to tell that story. I want to tell a story about a girl who happens to be trans, who is accepted by her family.
I think there's a lot of specificity in that, and I think that's obviously the film really resonated because it was coming from a certain place that seemed to have that. I don't love this word, but authenticity, I would describe it in some way. Does anyone else want to speak to the issue of gaze, or whether or not you feel like lived experience, for example, is undervalued when it comes to the craft of film or perspective?
Yeah, I think at this juncture and like our sort of filmmaking trajectory as a society, I think it's important that the people who are living and experiencing things are getting the opportunity to share what it is that they're going through. I think sometimes you hear a lot of times people are like, no, anyone should be able to tell anybody's story. And maybe we'll get there at some point, but I feel like right now, like people should be able to say what they're thinking and say what's true to them. And those, once we have all the voices on the table and once we've kind of gone through it, then we can kind of just like open it up. But I really do feel that, sometimes you can get that where you could cross over and you can sort of understand it. And we've seen great films from people who have made films about female characters when they're male or black movies or so on. And it happens, but I think it's more important at this point to push the voices of people forward that are living in those experiences and want to tell it.
I think from my perspective, like films are real, like touch us when they come from a place of authenticity. Like specificity is what resonates to all of us as like viewers, as an audience. So if you've lived that experience, or if you've lived the emotions, even if it wasn't that particular experience, it's going to feel more real. It's going to appeal to us more in general than something that is cookie cutter. So I think, especially on the fiction end, that's definitely the case. In documentary as well, we like to think that it's like, I'm a fly on the wall. That's not true. I'm never a fly on the wall in my films, and everything that I present on the film is an expression of who I am and what I understand in the story. So obviously, the story that I would tell about Jean biking across Canada is going to be different than somebody that would see it, like wouldn't understand where he's coming from, wouldn't understand family expectation, wouldn't understand that, you know, you can make a switch in your career at, you know, 30-something years old and be an artist, even though you never thought it was possible. So I think that those things all come out in the process. It's who we are, and that's what's on screen.
Yeah, and I'll just maybe add, I think that sometimes on all levels of gatekeeping, from funding to all along the way, film festivals, there can be a tendency to kind of push people who want to tell unique stories from their own perspective into something that makes sense for everybody, right? Film's a popular medium. Let's make something that we all understand. So for a very obvious example, like, what if someone doesn't know about residential school with Savage? Like, should we have a thing at the beginning that explains what residential school is, you know? And then suddenly it's like totally inauthentic and it's a PSA. But I also think of Atanarjuat, the Fast Runner, the feature film that's been voted the best film in Canada. And it is a really authentic look at a story from Nunavut, from the north. And its strength is that it is uncompromisingly from that perspective. And I remember watching it and feeling like I was genuinely entering into something I had not seen, and I didn't know all the codes, you know, to decode it. And that's what's thrilling. And I still have that feeling when I look at something. And actually, when I feel like I don't know all the codes and I can't understand, I find that really exciting, because to me, that's a sign of authenticity. And I think that one of the things as we move into, we hope, a culture where there's more of a willingness to look at diverse stories that we have not seen, and we kind of have this conversation, oh my gosh, we keep seeing the same coming of age story, you know, what's a Canadian film, da-da-da. And it's like, I think the article that was mentioned in the introduction was saying there are so many diverse, I even hate that word, but there's so many stories to be told. And we need to really, I think it's systemic, and we need to look, there's no shortage of people with stories to tell. Film has a high barrier to access because it does cost a certain amount of money, and so therefore it involves more gatekeepers than if we're poets or if we're painters or whatever. And those people do often say the kind of things like, oh, I don't understand, this doesn't make sense to me. And some people get it, you know, and they might be any color, you know, they might be white or whatever, but it's about a process, I think, of educating and bringing these conversations out so that we can understand that if there can be success from films that don't explain everything down to the minute detail, because actually takes away, now it's become something for, you know, whatever the dominant community rather than the community that it's actually coming out of.
Yeah, I think it's really important what you're saying, because, you know, I mean, there's a huge critique in the industry right now about, you know, who's been given the, you know, the funding in the past, and, you know, that there has been dominant and repetitive narratives, and then when diverse voices come into the fold, all of a sudden there's all these questions about the codes, the way you put it, Lisa, is great, which is really the specificity of the perspective, and that often that'll be missed because, again, you know, like throughout the industry, there's a lack of diversity everywhere, not just with filmmakers. Have each of you, as, you know, filmmakers coming from your own perspectives, have you faced particular challenges and barriers, like within the industry at large, that have, you know, just challenged you personally along the way?
I will speak to that in 1 second. I did want to say, just because we're in a room full of like young people that are just presumably starting their careers in film, that just because, you know, it's important to have people that look like me, people that look like you, like all of us on making films, like what you have to say is also of value. And it's not that not all voices including from dominant communities, are also valid in the stories that they tell. So don't feel like it's a minefield, because there are ways to navigate it responsibly. And so just make sure that you continue having that conversation with yourself. Is like, is this the most authentic story that I could tell? Am I telling this story responsibly? And that's a really good way to go forward.
Yeah, I think the context is just over-representation of certain kinds of stories that we see a lot of, but people should absolutely be empowered to come with their own voice. I mean, for me as a programmer, you know, the minute you hit a cliche, you know, I mean, at TIFF, the volume of what we're seeing is so crazy that we just see so much of the same thing. So, you know, it's really about coming at something in a way that's fresh. And so I think it's challenging yourself to get to that place, no matter who you are.
With respect to the barriers, and this is probably like coming from myself as a brown woman, I think I'm often a barrier to myself. And in as much as there are barriers out there in terms of funding circles, it's also about just like knowing that I have the right to ask and knowing how much I'm worth, and not undervaluing that. So I think that that's like a really important thing that I struggle with in my career, in my, you know, the way that I interact with the world, which is about all those pressures, but it's also ultimately like a barrier that I hold inside. And so that's one of the things that I think I'm constantly challenged with is like, if you don't value yourself, then nobody around you will value you as a filmmaker. And I don't mean that, you know, people won't value the films that you make, but ultimately to be paid adequately, to be represented in the way that's responsible. Those are all things that especially people of diverse communities, it's really important for us to remember to continually value ourselves so that the rest of the world sees us that way too.
Beautiful.
Just a small thing, well, yeah, I mean, I can definitely say that there's going to be Q&A later. Someone's waving their hand.
We'll get there.
Like I've been making films for probably 15 years now, and I had no shortage. I started in documentary, and there are many mornings at the airport where my older two white people who were my crew, who I was often meeting for the first time in the airport, thought I was a PA or something like that. You know, that was extremely common. And I just had no shortage of those same people, who are very nice people, you know, at the end of our shoot, sort of pat me on the back and say, oh, you really know what you're doing. Like, and I think that's changing, but the reason I mention that is, you know, film is a collaborative art. And just by the nature of who has had access, a lot of the people that we work with are, you know, look similar and don't look like us. And that's changing. And I have worked with lots of awesome people who are white, obviously. But I do think that it brings to mind for me the fact that I've never had a leadership style that is super hierarchical. I'm clearly at the top typically because I'm the director, but the idea of what that looks like has been typically very stereotypically male, and that your competency is linked to your ability to project a very certain type of authority. And so I think one of the things is, for me, that's never really been my mode of being in charge of something. I'm much more community-based, collaborative, and I have high standards. So I think one of the things that I find as a barrier, but it's changing, and it's something that if you're aware of, you can actually, you know, create amongst your team, is that sense of a different kind of leadership. Because I do think film can be very strongly affected by this culture that's almost military, and we need to do things that way when we have big crews and stuff. But there are ways to sort of culture jam that. And so I would say one of the barriers I've faced is slowly learning that the way that I lead and my personality can actually be authentic. I don't have to put on this big suit of armor, which is what a lot of us do, and like charge in there and like, you know, boss everybody around to show that I know what I'm doing. So, yeah.
Preach. Yes, yes, yes. Honestly, like, I had such a reckoning after film school. Film school fucked me up because it honestly did, because it was just 4 years of guys being like, this is how you direct. And like, they were like, you're aggressive and you get what you want and it doesn't matter what anyone else says and you have a schedule. And it really fucked me up because I was like, I can't do this. I cannot be a director because I don't have the personality for it. It's bullshit. It's your set. You get to decide how you want to run it. So we really have to rethink the whole idea of what a set is, because the industry is made for men to succeed. Even think about the way that film sets are run. We go off for 3 months if you have the budget, and we don't see our families for 3 months. How can a woman who's a mother do that? That's why there's not a lot of female directors. We have to rethink it. So we have to think, how do we make sure that females are getting on set? Well, we have daycares on set. But it's not a priority. So those are things we have to make happen. Those are priorities. So for me, when I was directing, I budgeted time. I allowed it time every day when we came in and when we came back from lunch. When we came in for the day and when we came back for lunch, we would have a circle talk of just like, how is everyone feeling? How is everyone doing? And then after lunch, to get like the spirit back up, we would have like a dance off.
And did that feel like a risk to do that?
Oh, I was petrified to do it. I didn't want to do it. Like, I was like, we're going to do this. And then the day comes, and I'm like, okay, let's get started. And the AD's like, no. You said you were going to do this. Let's go. So you also have to work with people who hold you accountable. And they're like, you said you were going to do this, so let's get to it. Put on Beyonce, let's go.
I want to be on that set.
It was great. And the thing is, like, you involve everybody. So it's not just, like, the creative leads. Like, everyone was in that room dancing. It was like the craft people are in there dancing, the gaffers are in there, the leads are in there. My parents that were on set because they wouldn't go away are dancing with us. Like, everyone is dancing.
That is amazing. We're going to open it up for questions. Tyrone, did you have anything? I just wanted to give you one chance to jump in here before we go to questions.
I totally agree with what everyone's saying. I mean, just speaking to what you were saying, Louis, one of the things that I noticed because I actually started as a production assistant on commercials for a long time, which is a very different than working in films and such. It's very professional, very stringent, very kind of like militant. Like, we're doing this now because everyone's on a budget and things like that. But one of the things I noticed when I first got on the film is that people would always try to, when they were making their first short, they would always try to hire the person who was very talented, who had like the best reel. They're always like, you need to find a cinematographer. It has to be the person with the best reel. It has to be the best editor and the best this and the best that. And the thing about it is that after a while, like any job that you do, when you do it for a while, you get good enough at it that you can just do it. So if you're a DP for long enough, you can just light a scene. You can just light a movie. And so the problem with going after someone who's very talented sometimes, but doesn't fit the way you want to run a set or the story that you want to tell, is that a lot of times they'd get these films that didn't have a lot of like emotion, a lot of heart into it, because the crew itself hasn't put any sort of work in it. They know how to do their jobs and they can do it well, but they don't actually believe in the story. They don't actually believe in the vision that the director is trying to portray. And so it's more important to find people who, I don't want to say are less talented, but like it's more important to find people that believe in what it is that you're doing and what it is that you're trying to accomplish than it is someone being super competent or super talented at what they do. Because that super talented person, you could get any amazing DP to show up and they'll just light your movie and it'll look great, but it won't be exactly what you were trying to accomplish when you were making the project, because they haven't bought into the vision. They haven't bought into the feeling of what was there on the page. So that's something that I saw a lot of my friends do at the early stage of their career, and I'm glad. It's horrible. I'm glad they did it before I did it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important what you're saying, which is people that bring heart. And I think all of you have said really amazing things about, like figuring out what it is you want to say and then finding the people that are going to help you build the film in the way that you want to do it, because every film set is its own culture, and it's like you're trying to create and work in the way that you want to. But I do want to ask one more question, because I think, Louise, you brought up something really great, and that was that your experience in film school wasn't great. I don't know if anyone else went to film school, but like, what do you feel would have helped you make these spaces more inclusive or, more supportive of you? Or did you find supports on your own, or any advice there?
I have a lot to say on this, but I'll make it fast. So I think one of the big things is just we need to have more honest and open conversations about filmmakers themselves. We talk a lot about the work. So let's bring up Stanley Kubrick. We talk a lot about Stanley Kubrick's work, and we're like, it's amazing, it's great. Let's talk about The Shining. The Shining's great. But what we're watching is not Shelley Duvall giving the performance of her life. We're watching the woman on the precipice of a mental breakdown. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about how he treated his actors. So when we don't talk about those things, when we're watching these films, we're not addressing how we treat humans. Because that's what we're doing. We're telling stories, and stories are lessons in empathy. So if we're not being empathetic to the people who are creating our stories with us, then what are we doing?
Yeah, and I just wanted to, just to follow up on what yours, I have actually too had the experience to follow up on what you're saying, Tyrone, where I've gotten the more experienced person who's more senior and more, does amazing stuff. But they just look at my thing when I was younger as like, whatever, and actually get worse than I get from someone who's super talented and more emerging and gives their all into it and is really invested in getting something out of it. And one little thing I wanted to say about that is now the way I think about it is like, I want everyone, sometimes not a PA, but hopefully even so, everyone's getting something by being there, So maybe you're getting less money than, you might, but you're getting to take a step up. You've done amazing shorts as a DP, but now you're, whatever. So I really do think about that. And my kind of attitude is I don't want anyone here doing me favors. So on whatever level, I want it to work for them and be interesting for them. But about film school, one of the things I was going to say that I went to Simon Fraser University Film School, and one of the things I really loved about the way they taught is, and I went when I was a bit older, but they did not center Hollywood as the Mecca. So we saw so many films made by diverse communities, but all communities, like basically local filmmakers, a lot of Canadian work, old NFB stuff, which is actually amazing if anyone hasn't seen it. Like, actually kind of blows your mind how cool they were, like in the 60s. And in some ways, anyway, aesthetically. So that to me was super encouraging because it made me feel like film was something in the community, in the air around me, local, and it gave me different visions because I think sometimes in certain film schools where everyone's trying to make the Kubrick film, you often get stuff that is really style over substance, and that never really lands and goes anywhere. And it's super, I'm not saying people can't go on to do the Hollywood thing, that's always there, but to really come from a place where film is an expression of your own experience, which is not necessarily for most of us the same as like a Hollywood rom-com. And the last thing I want to say is around the team that you build and kind of tying a couple of things together. When I made Savage, it was my first fiction, and I literally, because I never thought I would do fiction in film school, I didn't even listen to a lot of this stuff around fiction. So I didn't know what I was doing. And like on the way to set, I remember on the first day, it was a long drive, sitting with my producers going through the crew list and asking, I was like, oh, gaffer, okay, what do they do? And they were like, they do this. I was like, okay, do I need to talk to them? And they're like, no, the DP, you talk to the DP. And then, okay, cool. And we went through the whole list like on my way on my first day to set. And the whole time I thought I was the worst director ever because I didn't know what I was doing. And at the end, well, not at the end, but they were like, you were really great. I was like, no, it was terrible. And they were like, no, you knew what you wanted. You were just there doing it. But that's because I made the right choices when I picked those producers, right? And so exactly what you were saying, other producers probably would have thought, yeah, she did terrible. She had indecision, she was nervous, But actually when it counted, I was like, no, this is what I want. And they're like, make no mistake, you know what you want. You just need to talk to people and then talk it out. You basically need to talk it out. And then when we say it's okay, that's it.
But I think also what you're getting at is that there's trust between you and the producers, because it actually, even to reveal that, sometimes I think it's like, oh no, the idea that I'm the director and I'm in the know, and you can't sort of be vulnerable in that way. So that's an amazing story. Okay, we can open it up for questions.
Before you go, can I just say one more thing about film school? I do think you're not only in film school, but in your entire career, people will always find reasons to say no. You can't make this film, or you can't have that budget, or you can't be a documentary filmmaker and go into fiction because that's not the same thing, or okay, but you've done fiction, you've done a short, but can you really do a TV show? Like you'll just get so many, oh, I don't think you can do that. Just do it. Find a way, get an iPhone, whatever you need to do, just make a film. Don't wait for somebody to hire you on a film. Just make a film. Get your buddies together. You all are talented in different domains, producers, sound designers, whatever. Make a film, and that's how you'll start your career.
Amazing. And the power of peer groups cannot be undervalued. Questions out there? I see a question here, so please wait for the microphone to come to you so that everyone can hear.
So now when you say something like, just get out there and make a film and get your buddies together and whatnot, when you actually do make the film, how do you go about actually getting people to watch the film? Because I feel like that's probably also just as hard as making the film itself.
I don't know the answer. Well, I mean, no.
I mean, there must be like some way to get here.
I think that, I almost didn't become a filmmaker because when I made my first short film, which was called Suckerfish, I had started going to networking events, film industry things, and I hated networking. I've actually gotten better at it, but I was like, ooh, this whole self-promotion thing, it's, I like making the film, but, I did just submit that film and it got into Hot Docs, which was a really important festival. So actually, I'm sure there's other answers to this, but I'm back to focus on making the best possible film because no one knew who I was. That film just got into that festival because people liked it. And I think that Dennis is a programmer. Like, I know some programmers. And the truth is, even though so many films go out to these festivals, not that many, and I do jury work and stuff like that, so I also get to see a fair bit of work. The truth is, the things that really are authentic, have craft, have attention to detail, good sound design, all those things, they leap out from the crowd. So I would just go back to pour it all into the best possible film that you can make. And what the heck, take a year to make a short film if it's gonna be the best thing that you can make. I took 6 or 8 months to make my first short film, part-time after my day job, weekends and evenings. But, if you do that and you do the best job you can, and really hold yourself up to a standard on the craft front, because I do think sometimes, even though the authenticity is there, we can be so excited about the fact that we made a film, it's not my film, it's so amazing, that we don't necessarily say, could use probably a bit more work on the sound design, et cetera, et cetera. So
I took 10 years to make my first feature film, so it can take a while. And I do think that ultimately, if you do make a good film, people will watch it. So I don't really think I don't think that that's the barrier. I think the barrier is just actually, I get asked personally after film festivals, I want a job. And I'm like, okay, well, but nobody knows you can make a film. So go make a film. And really, if you don't invest in yourself, nobody's going to invest in you. And that goes for just, I don't mean monetarily, but if you don't put yourself out there and do the work, then nobody else is going to be inspired to do the work beside you. And that includes, the executive producers of all of my films have been cold calls. I'll be like, I'm really passionate about this thing. I'm really working on this thing. Here's my sample. Here's the thing. And then you get executive producers that will help guide you over the finish line. So.
That's great. Any other? I just also want to jump in and say submit to film festivals. For short films, film festivals are the way that your film gets seen. You can also put it online, but a lot of film festivals have different premiere requirements, which means that they want it to screen and it hasn't screened anywhere else. So if you pop your film up online, a film festival sometimes won't take it after it's been online. So make sure you check the eligibility requirements of what film festivals require of you. But film festival play can actually be a real notch on your resume if you happen to hit any of the big festivals like these guys have. That goes on your resume and it becomes a career building block for you that's really important. So you want to think about your strategy. Do I just want to put this up on YouTube and get as many views as I can? That's also a different and valid strategy. Many hits on YouTube is a type of currency that says, hey, my work has a value, but so is going to film festivals. That said, if you don't get into, your heart's desire film festival, just keep going. I think we all have to say that all of us, myself included, have bad films in us. We've made them, we get them out of our system. It's okay. It's okay to make a bad film. Just keep going.
Yeah, just to add quickly to that, I didn't go to film school. I went to college once, and that didn't work out, and didn't get a second chance. So I PA'd on commercials. That's how I made money, and that's how I made money to actually make the films. The first 2 films that I did not play at any festival. They got rejected from everything. And then it was until the 3rd film that I did that it started playing some, I don't want to say B festivals, but like festivals that were not TIFF or Sundance or anything like that. Yeah, and it wasn't until the 4th movie that it like really, the 4th short that it broke through. And so there's a lot of, you're sitting there, if you've made a few shorts, you kind of think to yourself, shit, well, this isn't really working. But I've always thought of myself as being far more tenacious than talented. I email everybody. I've spent hours emailing every single festival. I have like an Excel sheet with festivals and different people, and I just like email, and you ask for things, and you put yourself forward, and you just keep doing it. Because as you said, there's a lot of, it's so easy for people to say no. There's a lot of no's out there, and you just got to keep pushing and pushing through. And eventually, something comes through the noise. You don't know which one it's going to be. You might make 5 films. One of them might be incredible, and everyone's like, oh my God, that was amazing. And the other 4 people are kind of like, oh, I don't really know what you're doing there. But, you don't know which one it's going to be. So just like put your all into what you're doing. Make the best film that you can at the time that you can make it, and then put it forward. And if that one doesn't work, go for the next one. This is like, filmmaking is a long-term game. It's definitely not a sprint. It's a marathon. So it has to be something that you want to do for a very long time, as opposed to something you want to just do right now. Not that you need to make that decision right now. I know you guys are like younger and stuff.
Question?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm going to go over here. Oh, right here. So yes.
I have a question. Did someone like help you to emerge into the industry? Like, do you have contacts before or something like that, or you just like do it for your own self? Because that's my biggest concern.
I was a climate scientist.
Yeah, that was my question. Yeah, like to all of you.
I didn't really have any contacts. Sorry.
No,
it's just that's the truth. I didn't have any contacts when I started. It was just me being like, I don't really know what I'm doing. But there's also something very freeing in that, because you can do whatever you want. I would say that just if there's like a writer that you just like, just reach out to them. Like, honestly, just find their email, reach out to them, ask them out for like a coffee in a non-creepy way. But don't ask anything of them. That's the thing. Just ask them to just have lunch with you or something, just to get to know them. But don't expect anything to come of that. And that relationship will probably, if you connect with them on like a human level, that relationship will blossom, and you'll just learn things from them. And then maybe down the line you can ask something from them. But I think don't go into this being like it's about the contacts. It's not about the contacts. It's really about who you are and the stories you want to tell, and people that you like who maybe will talk to you and be like, this is what I did. What do you want to do?
Can I just echo on that? Totally true, because now I'm someone who mentors a lot of people. I did have, I won a mentorship, which was pretty cool, like with my first short film at Imaginative, and that person is still my mentor. Like, I literally had lunch with her last week, and it's like so many years later, and she gives me advice, and it's changed as I've gone along, right? But she's always ahead of me, so I think some of the mentor experiences, but I'm just gonna say, speaking as someone who now mentors quite a few people, and it does get tricky, like, now I'm getting like my time, it's like, oh my God, I wish there was 3 of me, but I would echo like, specific asks, like, do the research too. Like, I just had someone connect me with someone, and I'm gonna help them because someone that I like said, here, I wanna connect you guys, can you help them? And they're asking me really basic things that are online, that they could have actually Googled. So I'm sort of like, well, I'm not here to tell you about how a co-pro with the NFB works or something, you know. And that's kind of what they want. So also just, if you're going to make asks, also be aware that there's a lot of information online, and don't use people who are really busy to like do that. But I think that on a lot of like other fronts that you can really connect with people. And, you know, I just had an email at like midnight last night from someone I mentored who said, I feel really uncomfortable in a film situation I'm in. I don't know what her thing is, but, and she's like, can I talk to you? And I'm like, of course, like right away. So I think a lot of people are really, and we want to pay it forward. For me, I want to pay it forward because in some cases I had good mentorship, but truthfully, a lot of times I didn't. And you remember those times, and they kind of hurt when you reach out to people and they weren't there for you. So for me, I'm trying to model and be a good film citizen, because back to the thing we said about the industry we work in, is that we can tend to be really competitive, and you got to be better than the next person. And I'm trying to foster like a more inclusive and kind industry.
Question over here.
So I was just wondering, when you're making a film that has personal significance, and it seems like most of you have had that experience, how do you keep your films really succinct? Because I've been trying to finish editing my film for quite a while now, and it's really hard for me to cut down certain parts because I feel like everyone just needs to know these stories, when in reality people just aren't gonna sit there for an hour watching like a documentary from someone who just started out. So yeah, how do you manage to keep the film succinct when the content really matters to you?
You have to be ruthless. Like, honestly, you have to, like, there's a part of you that's like, this is my baby, and then the other one's like, sorry, boo, like, sorry about it, like, we don't need you anymore. Like, For Nona Anna is like 13 minutes long, but the first cut was like 25 minutes. So it was really just like, this needs to go, and this needs to go, and this needs to go. It's really like getting back to like, what is the center of the story? So For Nona Anna is about a girl's relationship with her grandmother. And there were a lot of other things surrounding that that we just didn't need. So anything that didn't fall within that like one little sentence description is out. Sorry. It's hard, but it's also really rewarding. And I actually kind of weirdly get off on it.
Yeah, I would say that, like, if I look back to my first film my first feature film, there's probably like 4 minutes towards the end. I'm like, when I watch it now, I'm like, what are those like 4 minutes? Like, those should have just been out. And I felt so strongly about them at the time. Sometimes just like putting, for practical measures, like putting it aside for a week or 2 weeks and coming back to it, you'll be able to see like the repetitive like beats in your film in a way that you might not have been able to before. Also, just remember that a person's first time watching the film is going to be probably more instrumental to you at this stage than your decisions about your film, because you're going to be in this gray zone. So if you do have a friend that hasn't watched it before, get their opinion, because sometimes that's more clear than ours when we're really like down in it, you know? So think about it really practically. Like, write out your beat note, your beats in your film, and like anything that's a double, out.
And if you're watching with your friend, they can say what they want, but even just like read the energy, because you can tell when someone's like, I'm not into this anymore. Like, you can feel that. So maybe even get 10 of your friends to watch the film, and just keep track of like where people start like shuffling or start like that kind of thing. You're like, okay, that's like a beat that like maybe I need to rework. Just like feel the room.
Oh, here's something I think of, because actually my first short film was a personal film, and it was 8 minutes long, but it came out of I wanted to do an hour long. And then I was hanging on to the idea that I would do an hour long. And what I did was I said, well, this short's going to be like the teaser, and then I'm really going to be able to get funding for the hour long after that. But what I said to myself is, what can I say in the short? Like, why does it matter? So why don't I make a short that tells the audience why they would want to watch the 1 hour that I'm going to make, which, by the way, when I got to the end of the 8 minutes, I was like, I'm good. I said everything I needed to say. I don't need to do the 1 hour, but it was at the end. And I still do that when I think about getting rid of stuff I like. It's like, okay, I care about this issue, I care about this story, I want someone to watch the feature. That's not happening. So what can I make where in my imaginary landscape, it would make someone walk away from my short going, oh, I see why this matters. And now if there was a feature, I would go see it.
Great. Tyrone, do you want to have the last word? We're just out of time.
No, just, yeah, it's what everyone said, just be ruthless. If it's a 1 hour, cut it, like set an arbitrary number, cut it to 40, sit up, wait for a week, come back, watch the 40 minutes, be like, is there something I missed? Is there something that, just playing around, because the editing and the writing stage is the most time that you have with your movie. You spend this little condensed time shooting it, and then you have all this time to like sit and edit and play with it. So just be fearless in that regard, and experiment and do different things, and also understand that if it does end up that you're sitting there and you're looking at a film that's 45 minutes and you feel strongly about it, then that's fine as well. One of the films that I did, Mariner, ended up being 20 minutes, and as you go along in your career, you always look back at your films and you go, I could have lost a minute there, But at the time, we felt very strongly. We were like, this is it, and we tried it. We had tried to make a 15 or 10-minute version of it. It just didn't feel right. We went back to the 20, and that was the place where it needed to stay. So just being fearless, being relentless about what it is that you're doing, and then get to a place where you feel the best about it that you can. And then let go. There's that saying that you never finish a film, you abandon it, sort of thing. So, I mean, at some point, you do have to allow your film to just like go on, just to like live and accept it.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you so much for all of your great advice, and thank you guys.